I remember having a conversation with someone where I said something along the lines of, I would never let my child, my son or daughter, be around an adult male alone, unless it was my father or my brothers. And I was met with this weird look, that's unnecessarily paranoid. And as someone who knew the statistics on abuse of children, that oftentimes it's a person you least suspect, oftentimes a family member, a neighbor, a trusted individual, I thought to myself, I would rather be paranoid than allow my child to endure a trauma, one that is notably shrouded in shame, where they don't know whether they can tell me or their father what happened. I'd rather be paranoid than allow them to experience that. Assalamu alaikum. If you are new here, my name is Hannah. I am a trauma coach who works with Muslim women. I've helped Muslim women around the world heal from complex trauma with incredible results, alhamdulillah. So if you are someone who is interested in that, whether you have suffered from childhood trauma, narcissistic abuse, divorce-related trauma, then the links to learn how to work with me are in my description. And my trauma group coaching program recently opened up the application for the January cohort, so you can explore that, inshallah. I am making this video because I felt it was necessary as a trauma coach to make this video, given the recent news of what has occurred in our community. News that shook the community, that broke our hearts, and opened up a wound that oftentimes I feel we have overlooked. And for those of you guys who don't know what I'm referencing, I will go ahead and explain. Recently, an FBI investigation report came out regarding Wasam Sharif, who, if you're not familiar who this person is, was an instructor at Al-Maghrib Institute. He taught their Quran Revolution program, I believe that was what it was referred to as, and was someone who was widely known in the Muslim American community. In fact, I have sat in an audiences where he has been a speaker, and my husband and I actually know individuals who were his personal students. The FBI case alleges that Wasam Sharif was engaging in exchange of child P and had specifically targeted a little girl, and the mother was helping to groom, and that the mother I believe there was something along the lines of the mother had been told or had been some sort of spiritual student, whether it was through Al-Maghrib or otherwise, of Wasam Sharif. The investigation is pending, though the evidence is extremely damning, and it was brought forth by his wife. His wife was the one who actually put in the report, called the Alabama police, which is where that young girl resided, and gave them the evidence that included videos, and links that were exchanged via the Telegram app. This is extremely disheartening, but my intention with this video is not to talk about how disgusted I am or how angry I am. I think that would be a bit self-righteous of me, and there's a lot greater of a topic of discussion that needs to happen right now. My intention with this is to start a conversation on the gaps that have allowed this type of abuse to occur, that have allowed it to continue, and specifically from the perspective of spiritual leaders in the community and the abuse that they commit and the level of devastation it causes to the community. Let's start off by saying this. What occurred in the Wasam Sharif, allegedly occurred in the Wasam Sharif case, as horrifying and disgusting as it is not the one-time, one-off experience. I remember very specifically a video that I had watched by an imam, who I believe was his first name was Nick, Imam Nick, who details his experience as an imam at a masjid in Texas, where he describes a handling of a situation where a child and his father came forward accusing a congregation member of essaying the child. If you don't know what that means, then you can Google it. I am trying to be mindful of YouTube censorship laws when I'm making this video. And he later finds that there were several others who had also experienced the same and were accusing the same individual. Imam Nick reported this to the authorities, as he should have, as that is the appropriate standard, that anytime a child's safety is in jeopardy or questioned, that the authorities should be immediately involved. And he reported it to the board, who decided that they would do their own internal investigation and decide how to navigate this. The ultimate following events led to Imam Nick getting blacklisted, fired as the imam, and the predator being allowed to hop on a plane and go back to his country. This mishandling of the situation reflects a systematized approach to allowing this abuse to continue. And it doesn't matter what the intentions were of the board individuals. You are not investigators. You do not have education around child abuse. You clearly do not know how to handle this. You were never the people that should have done an internal investigation. It should have immediately been given over to authorities, who this is their specialization, to ensure that this is investigated properly and no other child is abused. Not in lesser cases, and when I say lesser, I mean not involving things that are necessarily criminal, but are abuses and breaches of trust and involve a predatory grooming, even if of individuals who are of adult age, above the age of 18. Similar instances have occurred. We've heard of these background investigations happening. And instead of having the conversation with the community of, this is what happened, keep your child away from this person, keep your adult daughters away from this person, they are abusing their position of authority, it was swept under the rug, hidden behind the scenes, and those individuals were allowed to maintain their seats of power. This is something that begs a question of, what the heck are we doing as a community? I heard on this case, as I was going through Instagram, there was a Muslim coach, and she's a very popular Muslim coach, and it was very discouraging for me to hear, very alarming for me as a trauma coach to hear this from her, that said something along the lines of, be mindful how you talk about this, be mindful, and you guys and non-Muslims are watching. And to which my response to that would be, who cares if the non-Muslims are watching? If we have humiliated ourselves because we did not uphold the level of dealing with injustice and any harm towards a child, especially harm in this realm, is an injustice, period. There's no arguing that. If we have humiliated ourselves because we did not hold to the standard of Islam and non-Muslims are watching, then that is the fault of our community. We're not going to sit here and sweep things under the rug because of our fear around the reputation. Had we abided by the laws of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, had we abided by the level of justice, by the level of care of those who are oppressed that Islam demands, that the Prophet ﷺ demanded of us, then we would become the model of how to handle this. People would point to the Muslims and point to our community and say, that's how you deal with that. Look at how immediate the response is. Look at this level of support they give to the victims. Look at how systematic they are in their approach. But instead, we're worried about them looking at us and laughing at us, because we're a religion that talks about how many rights, how just we are, how incredible we are, and then this goes on in our community. And the issue is, this isn't a Muslim community thing. And this type of abuse occurs in every community. I don't care what religious community you're talking about, ethnic community, cultural community, it occurs everywhere. But as Muslims, we should be the first at the top of the line when it comes to shutting this down. And the unfortunate thing is, that's not what happens. These background investigations that are occurring, and not necessarily in regards to SA, but in general, the fact that this is how the approach is handled is very telling. And the conversations around this is very, very telling. As a trauma coach, I feel that one issue that is why these issues are not taken seriously or as seriously is because we do not understand the effect of trauma on the human at a body, mind, and soul level, what it does physically, what it does mentally, and what it does spiritually. And as such, we don't take it as seriously. We think that the repercussions of certain behaviors and certain abuses can just be recovered from. And I can tell you, as someone who works with individuals who have trauma, Muslims who have trauma, and one of the only people who are doing it with a mix of trauma science and Islamically informed trauma approaches, we are so out of our mind if we think that trauma does not perpetuate. If we think that trauma is something that isn't a big deal, or these kinds of experiences will not affect a person long term, we're out of our minds. We're crazy. I immediately, when I read this case, I thought about that little girl, and I thought, subhanAllah, she is the kind of child that in a decade or in 2 decades would come to work with someone like me. And I often think about, when it comes to, accusations of abuse and the proper investigation, part of the reason why things don't go the way that we want them to go, why people are not held accountable, is the backlash towards those who are making the accusations, even if they make them privately, is so intense. There's often spiritual abuse, gaslighting. They're afraid of the backlash if other members of the community found out. You're disrupting, you're accusing this person, how dare you? And that experience is extremely re-traumatizing. And we don't have the resources in our community or the systems to protect victims when they're coming forward with these accusations from that kind of backlash, which then means that so many of them sit in silence, they stay quiet, they suffer internally while their oppressor and their abuser gets to find their next victim, and it goes over and over again. Imagine if this had continued, who would be the next person that allegedly would have been abused? Who would be the next child? Who would be the next mother who would be grooming their child for someone like this? It is so disheartening. When it comes to positions of spiritual power, it gets even more terrifying, because, kind of as mentioned before, these are individuals who now have a whole level of there's authority there's an ability to kind of dodge these accusations, there's spiritual manipulation tactics that are used, there are huge celebrity sheikhs who have these huge followings of people that will just tear an accuser apart, and just make it that person just wants to retreat and not continue. And it's terrifying, because what is the standard through which we choose our leadership? I think back to what I had learned about the Prophet ﷺ and how not the Prophet ﷺ, but the Prophet ﷺ, as well as Abu Bakr and Umar radiallahu anhum, technically all the Khulafa, when they were choosing leaders to lead different parts of the Muslim empire. And they didn't go based on who had the most political experience, or who had the most, military experience, or who has had prior experience leading a country or a land. They chose these individuals based on taqwa. And sometimes it was the silliest thing. I remember a lecture that I listened to when it came to Hudayfa ibn al-Yaman, who was sent to, I want to say Persia. And please, someone correct me if I'm wrong. But one of these areas where he would now be governing of that area, and he came on a donkey and in his kind of like just simple clothing. And it was Umar ibn al-Khattab who had sent him. And Umar ibn al-Khattab, after he is there for a bit, Umar ibn al-Khattab sends a letter for Hudayfa ibn al-Yaman to come back. And Ibn al-Yaman comes back, and Umar notices he's still on his donkey and he's still wearing simple clothing. And Umar says something along the lines of, "You are my brother." He was calling him back to see, did this man change when he was in a position of power? Did he take that wealth and use it for himself? Did he start wearing the outfits of the wealthy? And it's not to say that that would be a sin, but it's to say that Umar ibn al-Khattab, as a leader, saw that the pinnacle of leadership is one who is able to remain humble in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and serve his people to the highest degree. But we don't have that. We don't have that in the community. We don't look at people in that way. We are looking for the most, exciting speaker, and the person who's so silly and connects with the audience. And it's no longer about who has the knowledge, who has the character, who has the taqwa. And that is very telling, right? That celebrity sheikhdom has taken over to the extent that you can have individuals who commit this level of sin, and we don't find out until how much later. And they have access to how many people and how many young, unassuming people that would be the next perfect victim to groom. It is something that we need to really be asking ourselves as individuals. What level of access are we allowing ourselves to have to these individuals, and how are we choosing our leadership? The other thing I'd like to talk about is the fact that our trauma education is extremely lacking. Our trauma education is extremely lacking. What is the connection to this? I think about this little girl and I think about how in a decade or two she would have come, to seek to work with someone like me because of the extent of harm that is done to her. And a child's job is not to understand abuse. It was not her job to think this is abuse and I need to stop it. She's a child. It is our job as adults to protect children from abuse because they are vulnerable. In my opinion, they are the most vulnerable of our society, and they don't have the capacity. It's not their job to have it. The trauma, when we understand what trauma does to the brain of an individual, what it does to them, the harm that it inflicts upon them, we're much more well equipped to address it at the very base level. What do I mean by that? If we understand truly how trauma can perpetuate, how it can affect marriages, how it can affect children growing up, how it, generational trauma continues, then we're much more likely to say, hey, this is something that is literally going to destroy our community from the inside out. And we will put in place the procedures and the systems to stop it in its root, right? To just nip it in the bud. But we don't, because we don't understand how trauma is. I am one of the only kind of trauma practitioners who intersects the trauma science with Islamic sciences. And not in just a way to teach you guys, but in a practical way. The unfortunate thing when it comes to trauma education in our community is it's still largely educational. We're still pulling from the research and lecturing about it. People don't want lectures about trauma. They want to know, how do I heal it? They want practical application because so many members of our society are suffering. That's why I created the coaching programs that I have. And what's unfortunate is that I've seen the neglect of this education. I've reached out to institutions, very large institutions, Islamic institutions in the United States, reaching out saying, hey, let's have a conversation. Let's develop something together. I can do a webinar for you guys. I can give a lecture for you guys. I can do something. Let's create some more resources around this so we can take it more seriously and start building our, these community resources for people to actually be able to heal. Because if they don't, then people leave their deen, they lose their mental well-being, they lose their physical health. It just completely destroys a person inside and out. And I reached out and I either got nothing, right? And by the way, I'm not someone who doesn't, I have access to these individuals. No response. My messages were ignored. My proposals were ignored. I was told we'll get back to you, and it never happened. And I was extremely disheartened by that because I was like, we're talking about literally the fate of our community. And Al-Maghrib institution was actually one of the institutions that I reached out to. Now, I won't sit there and say it in the sense of like, oh, they read my proposal and they like threw it out. It might have gotten lost, right? Someone had mentioned that they would connect with the team and reach back out, and they never did. It might have gotten lost in the email flow. I'm not here to vilify Al-Maghrib Institute. They've done a tremendous amount of good for our community. That's not my issue here. But my issue is to say that it shows where our priorities are. Because I'm sure if Sheikh so-and-so came in with a proposal for something around healthy, nutritious food, we jump on it because Sheikh so-and-so is saying it. But when it comes to trauma in our community, we don't give it a second thought. And we're content with our community getting their education around trauma from non-Muslims without the spiritual aspect of it. Or if the spiritual aspect is present, it's New Age spirituality, which is completely distant from deen. We even have Muslim coaches who are using, Muslim coaches who are using spiritual healing that is nothing to do with Islam, but it was taught to them by non-Muslims. That's very alarming. That's where people are going for their trauma education. That shouldn't be happening. We should have at an institutional level, this should already be accessible to people. And I'll plug in here. If you are a part of a community, an institution, a community center who has the funds and is, interested in a webinar, a live lecture, a workshop, I do that. I'm happy to travel. I'm happy to offer that, inshallah. You can go to the link in my description to my website and find my contact form, or you can find my email if you go to the bio section of my YouTube channel and reach out, and we can have a conversation around that, inshallah. I have a whole speaker booking page on my website where people can reach out to me. We need to make that a priority. We really do. There is nothing that I have come across that is as damaging to the structure of the community, because it destroys us at a faith level. It destroys us at a family level, right? And then it just continues generationally, and it just pulls apart. It's like we send a wolf right into the sheep's cove. It's extremely disheartening to see. When we build these systems of accountability, we're able to actually speak to this from a place of, we're no longer going to let victims feel like they can't share. We're not going to let this go on. We are going to make sure we're vetting our leadership. It's a completely different world. And what I have to say about anyone who is in a position of power, who abuses that power and uses it to harm people, Allah will humiliate you. Allah will expose you. It's insane how often these people get exposed. And they do a really good job of covering their tracks, but Allah exposes them. Because you cannot use something as beautiful and pure as Islam as a means of abuse. You can't do it. You can't do it. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will expose you for it. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect those of us who are in leadership positions, keep us sincere, protect us from ever entering into a situation where we think we are outside of the accountability of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. My takeaways for individuals like you who are watching this: make sure your children are educated around the signs of abuse. And if you don't know what the signs of abuse are, then educate yourself on it and teach your children. Make sure they know that you are a safe place they can always come to and they can talk to you. If it's not your children, your younger siblings, your nieces and nephews, your cousins, make sure they know. Because if they're empowered to be able to share things, then now we're ensuring that silence isn't the thing holding us back from addressing these issues. Number 2, hold your masajid, your institutions accountable. What are the systems you have in place? If someone comes in, if you find out today that someone is being abused, how would you navigate it? What is set in place to make sure that this is taken care of and taken seriously? The proper authorities are involved. Make sure that is set in place. 3, work on your taqwa. Work on your taqwa. You think that this just happened to a random person. People can fall into the most horrific and disgusting of sins when shaitan has access to their hearts. Do not ever think that you are protected. There's so much internal work that has to happen to protect us from dhulm of anyone, whether it is in the context of what happened with the alleged case or other dhulm. In the sense of a husband abusing a wife abusing their husband emotionally, mentally, physically, children being abused by their parents, parents abusing their children, children abusing their parents, parents abusing their children. The point is, none of us are exempt. And there's so much arrogance that I have seen around people who have the qualities of abuse and are not even willing to recognize it because they think they're in such, they have such a right of behaving the way they do, even though it's so counter to Islam. It is horrifying. It is not the way that things should be. I have a ton of content on trauma and on different topics that might be of interest to you. So if you're new here and you haven't hit subscribe yet, I hope you'll subscribe and it'll be helpful to you, inshallah. You can follow me on Instagram as well. All of my information, all of my content, and my website is linked in my description. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Comment your reflections without accusations. Reflections, inshallah, in how we can actually make a change in our community and protect ourselves from the wrath of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because I would hate that we are held accountable because of our turning the other cheek or our blind eyes. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect us. Assalamu alaikum.